So my name is Jess, this is Dalen and Tracy, and we're so happy to have you here at the Anti-War Committee's building. A few logistical things before we begin. First of all, if you haven't been here before, there are bathrooms available just through the door you came into, and then turn right instead of left to go out, and there's 2 bathrooms there. I already mentioned the translation option. And finally, we definitely want to make sure we have a climate of respect in the room today. We will talk a little bit about how we're going to ensure that climate in a few minutes, but there are some folks here helping with security. If you want to raise your hands, security volunteers. If you're having problems being disrespectful, then some of our friends will help you find your way out, but hopefully that won't be an issue. So with that, I just want to jump right in. Our main objective here today is to hear Tracy's report from her recent trip. She's got amazing stories to share, pictures, and perspectives that we can't hear on NPR or other mainstream media. So it's a really special opportunity. The Anti-War Committee itself always opposes U.S. intervention abroad and believes in self-determination. And in this case, that means we believe the Venezuelans in Venezuela can and should decide how their society is run. You and I may have different views about what they should do, but those aren't really the focus of our discussion or the topic today. We're really going to let Tracy share what she's learned and what she observed and keep our focus there. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Dalen.
So the agenda today is, first I will give an intro on the political context of the attack on Venezuela, and then afterwards we will have Tracy's presentation about her own personal experience in Venezuela. And then afterwards we will have a question and answer session which will be limited to 2 minutes roughly. And then after that, if there's any time left, we will do a discussion and that will end at around 7:30. So some ground rules for today is that there should be no interruptions, generally speaking. Hold questions and comments until after Tracy's done. That's why we have a Q&A. And we will call on folks and keep an eye on time. So no cameras. In the past, reactionaries have come to past events and attempted to use cameras to intimidate people and whatnot. So we have somebody who is recording the event, and it will be on AWC's website. And also no signs. Those are disruptive. We've had those in the past as well. And you will be asked one time if you are causing trouble, and after that, security will help you make your way out. So with that, I will start with the intro. So before we hear Tracy recount her experience in Venezuela, we need to understand the political context of the attack on the country. The United States is engaging in a multifaceted assault on all governments trying to move left in South and Central America. When the U.S. targets Venezuela, they target Cuba and Nicaragua as well. John Bolton, the U.S. National Security Advisor, called Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua the 3 stooges of socialism and the sordid triangle of terror. John Bolton openly argued in a speech that the walls are closing in on Maduro, and Miguel Diaz-Canel, the Cuban president, will be next, and that Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua, will follow after him. The U.S. has long had an approach to deal with international opponents: economic strangulation. This was the approach with countries from Iran to North Korea. John Bolton, in the same speech, unveiled new sanctions against Venezuela's central bank and a Nicaraguan financial institute. Even worse, crackdowns on non-family travel to Cuba to damage the tourism that Cuba relies on, and the enforcement of Title III, which will now allow U.S. nationals to sue foreign companies trafficking in property that was seized in the Cuban Revolution from American capitalists. This measure implicates thousands of properties worth billions of dollars and puts anybody doing any business in Cuba at risk of being sued for operating on supposedly stolen property. The U.S. is expanding its assault by discouraging all investment in Cuba through the Libertad Act. Bolton said that through this act, they are effectively forcing other countries to join its economic pressure campaign, whether or not they are willing. The greater crisis in Venezuela is vast. Petrostates, states reliant in natural gas and oil exports, are susceptible to what is called the Dutch disease. A resource boom leads to lots of foreign capital, but makes the country very susceptible to unpredictable swings in global energy prices. Furthermore, all of Venezuela's $64 billion in outstanding foreign currency bonds are governed by New York law. And Venezuela's most valuable non-financial asset abroad is Citgo, a Houston-based corporation. So it's obvious that the US has ample financial power with which to harm Venezuela if such is their desire, and it was. After a global swing and global energy prices, the US capitalized on the country. Barack Obama called Venezuela an extraordinary threat to US national security, thus scaring away rational investors and deterred loans. Then Donald Trump illegally outlawed Venezuela from borrowing or selling assets through the US financial system, which increased the stress on an economy already in crisis. His illegal financial embargo makes it nearly impossible for Venezuela to restructure its debt, an essential part of an economic recovery, and deprives more Venezuelans of food and life-saving medicines. In the recent escalations, US sanctions on the country, meant to induce regime change, has resulted in over 40,000 deaths, according to the Brookings Institute. The assault on Venezuela is the precursor to the assault on all of Latin America's attempts to bring about a more equitable political system. And as John Bolton said, other countries will be overthrown if the coup in Venezuela succeeds. That illustrates how important it is for us here in the Imperial Core to understand and resist our government's attacks on these countries and their sovereignty. And with that, I will pass it over to Tracy for her presentation.
So, I'm just going to speak real loud. If you can't hear me, maybe in the back, you can make a comment. And I'm going to turn like this because I brought some lovely visual aids. So you can see Venezuela is at the top, bordered by Colombia, Brazil, right? Both very hostile, right? This is to give some context. I'll just start by letting people know. So my trip, I went April 28th through May 4th. It was a delegation organized by Freedom Road Socialist Organization, but today I'm going to be wearing my anti-war committee hat. So I can talk more about the socialism side, and I'll talk a little bit about it because it's definitely a major part of what's happening. But I want to really give people a sense of why, like how wrong these myths are, and talk a little bit about the society that they're building. But I think it's really important to start with the history of Venezuela, right? One of the things that's really missing from the conversation that people get in the news. In 1499, Venezuela was invaded by the Spanish, colonized, and then created a monocrop slave state. A lot of the issues that Venezuela is grappling with are basically rooted in this, in being a colonized country, right? So they had very little infrastructure, they had a single export that they were reliant on. And so when Simón Bolívar comes onto the scene, he comes from one of the richest families. Actually, I'll have you move forward, and that's Caracas at night. It was beautiful, but we mostly stayed in Caracas, or we did stay in Caracas. This city it's the capital city of Venezuela. It's got 6 million people in it. It's huge. This one's particularly dark because we were taking a gondola ride down. One of the things that they're trying to do is bring more transportation, and so bringing gondolas so that people who are up in mountainous regions can both enjoy the view and the beautiful scenery and all of that from the top of the mountain, but also get from top to the bottom to the major parts of the city. Now, this is not a good view to be able to see how wide it is, but it's massive, right? It's expanding. So Simón Bolívar comes onto the scene. He comes from one of the richest family in Venezuela, right? This is in 1808. He comes onto the scene, and he basically is sent away by his very rich parents, and he realizes what's happening in Venezuela, which at the time was, Venezuela and Colombia were one state, but he comes onto the scene and basically gives up his family wealth and says, decides the liberation is what Venezuela needs, right? They don't need to be a colony anymore. And this is important because he still looms very large in the consciousness of Venezuela. If you want to go forward, I've got a couple pictures of just showing like Chavez and Simón Bolívar really thought of as liberators of this country that was just ravaged by colonization and then by neo-colonial policies. So, the 80s come around and neoliberal reforms pushed by Europe and the United States are just devastating the country. All natural resources are extracted for the benefit of a few. By 1989, the country is in complete economic collapse with, people started to rise up because there's all of this wealth in Venezuela and none of it is going to the people. Right? It is being used by a few rich people and extracted. And so they rise up, and Chavez becomes a figure in this time because he's part of the military, and he agrees. He thinks that they need to be nationalizing their resources, and the people of the country should benefit from what they have. He attempts a coup in 1997, and he is unsuccessful. So he's put in jail for 2 years. He's pardoned because there's popular support for him, and he builds a political movement, and he's elected to power in 1998. And so, no, he's elected to power in 1998. And then he's elected 2 more times. So you want to understand kind of the background of Venezuela. The idea is that Chavez and Simón Bolívar are looked at as liberators, right? They're looked at as people who are trying to take their country back for the people of Venezuela. These are just a few. It's everywhere. It's a very, very beautiful and colorful city, and they have all over radio stations, overpasses. Simón Bolívar and Chavez are often pictured together as 2 people who tried to bring the resources and all of the wealth of the country and make it an equal society. When Chavez was elected, Venezuela was one of the most unequal countries in Latin America, and now it's considered one of the most equal societies. So that makes a big impression on people, right? And it makes a lot of sense why he's so beloved. So next I want to kind of talk about the coup attempt, which it's coup attempt. The funny part is you can't attempt a coup if you're the president. So logically it didn't make any sense from the get. This is, so on April 30th, we were been there for a day and a half, something like that, 2 days, because we got in Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday morning we wake up and there's a woman screaming, "We're being liberated!" She doesn't leave her house. She's just in our apartment complex, not leaving her house. Now this is the side of Caracas where we were located. So we were staying here in Marquay, and this is where the coup attempt happened. So here's the aerial base, and there's a bridge right over here where they're on this coup attempt. So we're a mile and a half from it, witnessing nothing. We hear people banging pots, which is people are banging pots, which is a thing that happened in Argentina, but nobody leaves their houses, right? The area we're in is an opposition territory, right? But nobody's leaving their houses. The news in the US is saying people are flocking to the streets because they're being liberated, but nobody's leaving their houses. It was just so untrue, it was shocking. And so, these are some pictures of what it looks like where this faux coup attempt happened, right? You can see, not great, but you can see a little bit all of these roads are destroyed because they were shooting. So go ahead one. So, huh? The opposition. So in Venezuela they call it the opposition. Just that's how they refer to it. So this is the kind of image you see in the news in the US. Notice this is a close-up shot. Because there's nobody with them. I mean, there was an opposition rally, but it was small in comparison, right? And these 2 jokers were together. This gentleman is named Leopoldo Lopez. He was in jail until that coup attempt, busted out by duping some very young military kids who were in charge of him, maybe an oversight on the part of the Venezuelan government, but he got busted out, and many believe he was kind of the architect behind Guaido. Going to the next slide. So the Venezuelan news is talking about how they had double agents, actually, right? They knew that they had embedded military people, high up military people, to give Guaido and Lopez this sense that they would be successful, right? To goad them into doing this coup attempt. Very different than the news that you saw here. So, the kind of what the news is saying is basically they've got this, I think it was the head of the army in Venezuela, said that when he got the call from Trump that it is time to start the coup, he said, "Not today, Trump." So that is something that you will see often in Venezuelan news now and on posters and stuff. "Not today, Trump." And they did have a high-level military person defect, but not the levels that they had wanted, and definitely not the levels that would have made them successful. So The other thing that happened at that time is that the vice president called for the people of Venezuela, the workers of Venezuela, the people in the street, to be in the streets and to defend their president, to go to the presidential palace. So this is outside of Miraflores. Miraflores. My Spanish is really bad. So this is what that looks like. These are people, these are normal people who just came out to defend their president, to defend their country. And that's what we saw. What's interesting now is if you read the US News now, they're saying, yeah, they thought if they projected strength that they would be successful. Like there's no sense to it. There's no sense to it at all. And so, you know, it's kind of like they keep hoping that they will be successful, that they will get the military on board, and they don't. They don't, and the vast majority of people are not. You know, an interesting note that they told us at the time is all of those military people, they're not part of a political party. They just believe in the fact that they should have a say over their government, that they should be able to defend their government from US imperialism. So, one of the other these are some of the pictures of from the protests that were outside of Miraflores. So these are pictures of people who have been killed as part of the US's attacks and the opposition's attacks. You can just slide through a few of these. But people are very clear in Venezuela. Like, they know who the enemy is. They know who is instigating these attacks. And so you see this a lot, this type of thing, and the OEA is one that they talk about a lot. Yeah, keep going through a few of these. I'm not going to translate because honestly I can't, but the point is that the OEA, which is
Organization of American States.
Yes, they're basically, they know what they're doing. They know that they're trying to destabilize the country. And so people are very clear that that is something that they don't want. This is one of my favorite banners. Yeah, these were just like up. So, you know, the coup attempt happened really early in the morning. This is by like 9:30. They've already, so at 5 o'clock in the morning, something like that is when they're on the bridge and you see all the video on CNN of that. This is before 9:30. They've got banners up. Like, people are ready to fight, like ready to be in the streets and to defend their government. So these are some of the other ones that are like, go home. So that's Maduro kicking Donald Trump out, which is absolutely stunning. They had a giant stage. They were ready. These are this is a student brigade that's been organized kind of to train youth in fighting and being part of resisting US imperialism, and they do a lot of the artwork. And they're obviously really talented at it. I really would love to have some of them here. I'm not as good. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, so you can get a sense. This is, I think this is noon, right? This is still how many people are standing out there. And it was more like kind of a rally at that point, you know. There was clearly nothing that was going to happen anymore. They had lost really badly. So, and these are just some, the next day is May 1st. And that protest, the rally for May 1st, it's a national holiday, gets bolstered because of it, right? So they've had, 100,000 people in the streets the last couple of years. This year it was 400,000. Yeah, so this is amazing. That's Maduro speaking. He was the only speaker at the event where he basically says, yes, we've made mistakes. And he reads some of the mistakes from the stage and says, we've got to fix these things. So we're going to call a national conference of the, different social and community groups, and we're going to talk. We're going to try and figure some of this stuff out. But he also very clearly said that what they need to be doing is they need to be boxers. They need to defend their government and their country while also moving forward their plans for social change. Which was very motivational. Yeah. Every time we saw something anti-Trump, the people, we were like, yeah! They were like, come take pictures with us. It was great. So you can keep going. For example, that lady was super funny. Yeah, and that's just kind of the crowd shot. I've also never been at a protest where everybody is quiet for a speaker. Like, the deference for Maduro was notable because it's 400,000 people and it's almost silent, Wow. It tells you something, people want to hear what he has to say. These are just a few more of the incredible pictures. Miners, for May 1st, people come in their union gear and march with their unions. So I believe these are the miners. There are a couple other ones in there. I'm not sure if they all got into the slideshow. No. We're going to move on to the next myth that people are starving. And the funny part is we decided to take the picture after I'd already scarfed down my hamburger, which was delicious. People aren't starving in the country. That's just a lie. So when we were first there on Sunday through Thursday, there were a lot of places closed, like a lot of businesses you could just see on the street. 1 out of 5 storefronts is open, something like that. And I asked, and they basically said, well, first, your government is claiming they're going to do something around May 1st. So, Bolton had been quite clear that he planned they had planned some kind of attack. And May 1st is a national holiday. So they close a lot of businesses were closed because of that. But that small businesses, I was also told small businesses in the country are actually thriving. And so one of the reasons also, I want to back that up a minute. So we had a lot of food while we were there, and we found, like everywhere you go, there's people selling on the streets. There's a lot of food production, and one of the things that they're working really hard to do is to understand where food's being produced and where it's going, because they've had all of these initiatives that include urban farming and taking back productive parts of the land around the country so that people can be producing food, right? And not rely on big businesses that decided to shutter their doors because they weren't making enough profit. It's rather telling. I mean, one of the other things they said is people close their shops because they can make more money if they make food scarce. So some of these businesses are closing knowing that tomorrow they'll get $5 for a loaf of bread instead of $3 because people are more desperate. Which is just, it's disappointing. And I think it's hard because there are price controls, right? Like the price cannot be, like in the law of Venezuela, the price cannot be more than 30% of what it costs to buy. But that only works if it's enforced. And the problem is enforcement is hard when you've got it happening on a rampant scale and you have so many fronts of things that you're trying to fight. So that's one of the things that they are working on, but food is not, people aren't starving. The other part that they don't talk about in the news is that one of the other main initiatives is called the CLAP, which they're food boxes that are distributed to 2/3 of the country. So walking around Caracas, you can see CLAP boxes being distributed. Like people can go online, they can even customize it, right? Like the government website, you can customize your CLAP box, which I thought was really cool. And then, and so it's about making a false claim of scarcity. I mean, we went to markets, and especially in Maracay, the rich neighborhood we went to, the markets are fully stocked. The problem, inflation is real, and it is a problem, but there's tons of food in the country. It's just a way to make people feel like, it's a lie that they're trying to propagate in the United States. So, let's go next one. So the thing I think people should know is the opposition it's a problem of the rich trying to take the country back. This guy, Leopoldo Lopez, was in jail because he literally organized and instigated killings of people on the road. I mean, he told people to put up razor wire, which in a country where a lot of people ride motorcycles, that decapitates people. That's why he's in jail. And that's who the US is busting out to uplift their faux president. That's the kind of crazy chaos that they're putting forward. They're not regular people on the road that come to our events and try to protest us. I mean, they are part of the upper class of Caracas that are propagating lies in the country too. So in the richer parts of the country, it's like a gated community. Every time we didn't wear anything that would show that we're with the people of Venezuela. Like if we had government shirts that we were given, we couldn't wear them on the road when we were leaving where we were staying. Because people are crazy about it. They are burning people in the streets. Like the people that we stayed with wanted us to make sure that we were clear. Like the opposition is people who will burn you on the street if they think that you're part of the Maduro, if you're pro-Maduro. They propagate lies like, if you have two houses, we will steal them from you. Or the government will take them away from you, And that's not happening. That's not even kind of happening. What they're doing, what the government is doing at this point is taking productive things that are not being used and turning those factories back on so that they are producing food and so that they are producing goods for the people of Venezuela. Let's see. Yeah, so where else are... One of the things that really got me is that one of the places that they tried to attack in this 2017 attacks that the opposition orchestrated, they went after the news. Sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Like an opposition that is racist to its core, an opposition that has no problem telling lies to try to win people over, or make people who are not watching closely, make them get crazy, you know? And going after the news is one that is pretty particular. So this, one of the things that we got was a tour of Telesur while we were there. And I'm not going to translate this, but the idea is that the point is that they make news for the people. This is my translator in the back. Am I translate?
Yeah, well, I can't see that far away, but I'll get closer to you. Sorry. Oh my God, there's a card. So in Telesur, we propagate through our own platform, right? We propagate our platform. The access to information, verás como verdad, no? True. Yeah, that's what I thought. So access to true information and the opportunity for everyone, and I like that they put the feminine form of everyone before the masculine form of everyone. I just don't point that out because it's actually very good. People have changed constitutions to do that, y'all. Like, it's important. For everyone as a fundamental right of the people.
Yeah.
Now I can go back.
So, thank you. Yeah, so, that's Telesur's mission, actually, is to bring information to all the people and bring true information. And that's the type of places that the opposition attacks. We were invited, luckily, we got an opportunity to do an interview. Two of the people on my delegation actually did an interview on primetime Telesur. And the comments on this, it was really well viewed. It's on YouTube. If you are friends with Sean, or he's got a link to it on his Facebook page. Like the comments on YouTube are like, I didn't know that Americans thought that way. Like opposed U.S. imperialism, which is wild, you know? It kind of tells you how little our message is getting to everyday Venezuelans, which is unfortunate, but we're trying to bring that up and we're trying to get everybody here on the same page. So, I'm going ahead way too fast. One of the other key myths that they're trying to propagate, or that the U.S. media is trying to propagate, is that Maduro is a dictator, which is so wild given how much support he has. You know, the fact that the military isn't turning against him, the fact that the people of Venezuela come out in the streets. And one of the things that they do is here, thank you, they actually put up this is like a square in the middle of Caracas, outside of Simon Bolivar Plaza, where they just play the news and people sit and chat. So you can go to the next one. I think, are there two of this one? Yeah, so these are just people sitting in here and chatting about what's happening in the news. Like, they have a much higher level of understanding of what's happening around the world than we do. Because it's a part of their culture, and it's a part that the government is really trying to uplift, so that people know what's going on. And it's wild given how far that is from where we are. The other thing that, we talked, that one of the people we're with talked a lot about is the way that the elections are done, right? Like, they have 3 different checks. First you have a fingerprint ID, then they will print out your ballot so that you can proofread it before you submit it into their bin, and then it is then validated. We don't have that kind of checks here, you know? And we don't get to, the electronic voting things, they won't let you go back and check them. It's not the same. One of the women we were with told us that she actually got booted from being with the election. She was supposed to be part of the last election in May, and they booted her because they thought her questions were kind of fishy. They actually go around and check people. I mean, I'm sure she's on the up and up. She was, but they're very strict. Like, they want to know that you are not going to mess with their elections, because that's one of their, one of the things that they want to prove is that they do it right. They work very hard to make sure that their elections are free and fair. And Maduro won the last election by 67%. And that's with, some of the opposition boycotting, but not all of them. They talk about him being a dictator. He moved the election forward at the request of the opposition, and then they boycotted it, right? This is a ploy to try and make it sound like he's a dictator in their country. It's all lies. It's like spin doctors, right? They wouldn't let us run. No, you chose not to run, actually. Leopoldo Lopez, if you watch John Oliver, he says, oh, they wouldn't let him run. No, he actually got put in jail because he killed people. And the other two guys decided not to run. But then there was opposition people who ran. They just lost. And they still try to propagate this. And so, one of the things you'll hear in the news now is that, well, I don't think the U.S. should intervene, but I think that, Maduro really should have an election. They don't get to tell us when we have elections. Why should we be able to tell Venezuela when to have elections, especially with all of this meddling that's happening already? So I'm going to move on to the part where I tell people about the exciting ways that they are trying to build a better society. So Venezuela is not currently we'll come to this in a minute. Venezuela is not currently a socialist country. Their leaders, including Maduro, believe that that's the direction they want to bring their society to. And no matter what you think about socialism or not, the fact is they want to fundamentally change their government to be about people and to be about fulfilling people's needs and not about profit, which is really moving. When you meet with government officials and they say housing is a right, it just makes you realize how far away from that we are when people are getting evicted on a daily basis because they can't afford rent. This city, like Minnesota, I think is at like 10% homelessness, is that right? Something like that. I mean, it's appalling and it's wrong. There are almost no people living on the streets in Venezuela. So one of the ways that they're doing this is what they call grand missions. Again, my Spanish is terrible and I'm really sorry, don't follow my lead. We were there at a time when they were celebrating the 8th anniversary of the Gran Misión Vivienda, which is the Great Housing Mission that started in 2011. 2.6 million homes were made. So they look like this, right? These are some of the newer ones that were created. You can maybe hit the next one. Yeah, and that whole block is all houses. They're not all high-rises. There are single-family homes being built around the country. In Caracas, it's mostly high-rises. And they can be customized, right? They will customize the house to your request. And people pay what they can. So if you can pay $100 a month in rent, or the equivalent of $100 in rent, that's what you pay. If you can't, you pay less. And the funny part is, all of these places, I didn't get close-up pictures of them, but you can see as you're driving by, like, they have air conditioning. They have like water tanks. And right now there's water shortages happening. And the place we stayed didn't have hot water. Why was that? Because the guy who owns it, the guy who owns the building we stayed in, decided that he could still make money without installing new pipes. So he didn't install new pipes. But the government realizes actually people should have hot water. Like, the people living in government housing have it better than most of these middle class and upper class people, but they're too afraid to actually just realize they would be better off going with the flow. So yeah, there were houses all over. One of the things that kind of kicked off this housing, the Gran Misión Vivienda, was a big landslide that happened in Venezuela shortly after Chavez was elected. And so, the next day he's out there, which, you think, what would happen if, would a U.S. president be at a natural disaster the day after? No, they don't go. They maybe show up a week later. Well, you gotta slow down now. No, so, it's appalling to think about where we are and where they are. So Chavez goes to where this natural disaster happens, and people lost their houses because a lot of the houses are built in in places that have a lot of problems with landslides. It's a lot of mountains. So he just said, we have to fix this, and so they built housing. They built housing like crazy, and the people that suffered in this landslide that lost their homes, they got some of the first houses. And that's the Gran Misión Vivienda, and the conference was amazing. There were people from around the world, not very many Americans, who were talking about building, how they're getting materials in and things like that. But because there was so much going on, we didn't get to stay there very long, which was good and bad. If there hadn't been a coup, I would have loved to hear more about Gran Misión Vivienda. And instead there was the faux coup. Some of the other missions that they had, there was Mission Robinson, which was about eradicating illiteracy in the country. And so there's almost no one is illiterate. But they realized it created this bigger problem. Then people want more education. So it meant that they had to build more schools, and they had to be funding schools, education, like K-12 and college educations, which means that now the country is a place where most people are able to get schooling. And through Mission Robinson, they realized what they actually need is Mission Milagro, which is eyesight. A lot of, especially the older population, wasn't able to read because they can't see, right? A lot of degenerative eye problems, and even problems of eyes, that could be fixed. But because there wasn't health care provided, people weren't getting cataracts fixed and things like that. And so Mission Milagro helped treat eye problems and get glasses to people all around the country. Then there's Mission Smile, which I'm sure that's not the Spanish name for it, but that's how it was explained to me, where they provided dental care for Venezuelans because a lot of people weren't smiling in the country because they were afraid of their teeth. They were embarrassed of their teeth, and so they had a mission to help with dental care around the country. And then one of the first missions was Barrio El Denta. Barrio El Denta. And this was right after Chavez was elected, where Cuban doctors and nurses were sent to the more rural parts of the country to provide healthcare and get an understanding of the healthcare needs of the country, because people had never seen doctors, in a way, like in a country where all the wealth was extracted, doctors don't go to rural areas. And so that was one of the first missions, was to provide healthcare around the country. One of the other things that's a major part of Venezuela's process to try and create change in their country is what they're calling communes. And so basically this is a way that they create community empowerment. So on a small scale, people in a community band together and they figure out what needs they have, and they try to use that momentum together. Just really, really interesting stuff. So we met with the Minister of Communes, so this is we got a meeting with a government official, which is kind of wild to me. But she's the person who was coordinating the big meeting of all these social groups that was happening the Saturday that we left. She actually took 2 hours out of planning for that to just sit and talk to us. And she told us, that communes are some of the most beautiful things. It's the way that they are starting to build socialism inside of the capitalist state that they have. So they use communes as a way to build collective power. So they figure out transportation needs, they look at what food they need, and they try to work on that together. But what happens when you're trying to build socialized production in a capitalist state? Well, the laws are a problem. So I hadn't even thought about that, because it's just so foreign to us, but just understanding how do you provide a loan to a commune? Who's the person who's in charge of it? You have to fundamentally change your laws to be able to allow this to be an entity that gets loans and gets assistance from the government and all of that. And so the Ministry of Communes is a way that they are trying to sort all of those questions out. And it's just so wild to think that that could be a thing. And it's just really quite beautiful. They are working hard to change the laws so that people have rights over the coastal areas, right? Because small fishermen are getting wiped out by large trolling enterprises, that can just operate on a scale that small normal Venezuelans can't operate. Then one of the other places that we visited, oh, that's Blanca that we met with. I think go back one. No, go back the other way. Yeah. So that's the foreign ministry. But yeah, then I think I put them in the wrong order. I'm sorry. One of the other places that we visited was the Corpo Electric site. Go back one. Yeah. So this is the break room of the Corpo Electric site. Now this is one of the places that was attacked in March when they went after the electrical grid. This room didn't exist like 5 years ago, they said. They basically realized they needed to reclaim parts of the building and space to create community spaces, right? And these are people we will probably never know. They were part of defending the electrical grid of that neighborhood. Now this sits very close to where La Carlota, the bridge, and where that faux coup happened. It is in an opposition heavy neighborhood. So these workers are under constant threat, but a lot of them have joined the militia, which is popular military basically. So they have teams that work to guard the area day and night. And they've warded off some attacks, but they can't, there was the major one that actually attacked several parts of the electrical grid. And they said that the goal of the opposition was to keep the electrical grid down for 62 days. And think about what you would do with 62 days without electrical in a major city. It would be chaos. They got it up in 5 days. And that's because all of these guys worked really hard because they believed in the project. Now what they're eating is also really exciting. So this is I know, right? What they're eating is really exciting. So this food was cooked by 4 ladies who bring in their own pots and pans, and they get the chicken, they get all of the ingredients, the eggplant and all of that. They get that from the neighborhood, right? From people in the area. They make 500 meals a day and distribute it to workers all around, right? Most of them eat it here, but there are also people who are working, on the electrical grid all around the area, and so they get fed, which is amazing. To have the community support and to have that kind of set up to make sure people get fed. I mean, most people don't get fed at their jobs, and and most of the time the bosses don't care if you eat or not. Probably better for them if you don't, because then you don't leave your job. So it's a testament to just how collective, when people think collectively, how beautiful and what they can do together. And so one of the other last things I wanted to talk a little bit about is just the role that the military plays. It's very weird to go to a country where the military is doing stuff and you agree with them. Yeah, so I was thinking, thanks for your service, but it seems really odd. It seems really odd. But they do, by law, they're not part of any political group. They really just are there to defend the country for Venezuelans. And so at one point we got pulled over, when we were on our way out on Saturday, the 4th, there were a lot of opposition protests happening, and especially in opposition heavy areas. And so they were pulling people over to check and make sure, and we're on our way to the airport, so that's a pretty strategic place. They want to make sure things are safe. So we get pulled over, and we get out of the car. They don't have a woman, a female military person with us, which they do have female military people. They just weren't with them at the time. So I didn't get searched. I didn't get a pat down like the men in our group did. And then they were very clear as they searched our stuff that we were there to, we should watch them. They wanted us to know that they were doing it for security and not to steal our stuff, which is kind of bananas. That doesn't happen, There are stories of people my father-in-law talks about going through TSA and a TSA agent said, "Turn around while I check your wallet." And that happens all over the place where people get shaken down, but that's not the role that they play. They're there to make sure that their homeland is secure. As we were driving, we drive away, and we get flagged down by this giant vehicle next to us, and it turns out it's the mayor, and he wants to make sure that we were searched well, or not well, but that, they didn't do anything fishy. The mayor wants to make sure that we're okay. And he didn't believe our driver saying, oh, I got a bunch of gringos in the back. He was like, no, you don't. And they rolled down the windows and saw us and started laughing hysterically. But you know, it's like a total reversal of the role that the military and police play in our lives, right? You get pulled over, you don't know if you're going to leave with your stuff. You know, if I were black, I wouldn't know if I was going to leave with my life. You know what I mean? Like, it's just very different. And so, it's, you know, and that's it. Then when you think about it, then it makes a lot of sense why the military isn't turning. They actually want their country for their own people and to defend the project that they're moving forward in Venezuela. So I think I'll close up pretty quick here. But, you know, one thing that was people really wanted to impart is that they, you know, they want solidarity. They really do. We were very warmly welcomed everywhere we went. But they don't want U.S. imperialism. They don't want the U.S. to intervene in their country. Sanctions are clearly one of the things that's making life very difficult for Venezuelans. Like, it's true. You can't get all the medicines that you could get if there wasn't sanctions. And it's a country that, you know, like, it is very rich, but their money is getting stolen, held in banks that they can't access, things like that. But people were really happy to see us, and it was really, you know, it was very funny. They'd have us like sign stuff. There's some pictures of that. Oh, that's some of the other cool stuff I could talk about for hours. I have there's just so much stuff. So this is a militia guy who was like, you know, we stood out because we're clearly gringos. And he was like, I want a sticker. So he was like, yeah, I'll take a picture with you. Like, you know, I've never seen a government official so happy to hold a socialist newspaper. Like, it's so cool. Keep going, we got a few more. I think I got a few more in there. That's at the theater. Yeah. This is just some of the beautiful pictures of Caracas. That, go back one, that spot there is hysterical because it's a bunch of really pretty umbrellas. It's also where all of the teens do their selfies. So, you know, this destabilized country, we're standing waiting for our ride to come, and they're just like, teen after teen is coming through and doing selfies in this little spot here. Just kind of a shopping area. I'll say, you know, after being there, it's hard not to be moved to see what could be. You know, like, it's really, it's quite amazing. You know, these are the type of things that are just hanging up, you know. Liberation won't happen unless women are involved. I think it's really, it's a beautiful thing, and it really, it makes you think a lot more about what could be if we had control of our society here. And I think that part is, right now we have to combat a lot of myths that are being put out, and we have to stop our government from intervening. But what's being built in Venezuela is something that we should aspire to, and it is very inspiring. And so I'll just close with one of the things that Blanca said, that if Venezuelans win, the world wins, and if they lose, the world loses. So, yeah. Oh, sorry, I'll tell you one more story. This guy in the middle, he was part of the attempt with Chavez at a coup back in 1997. It had to be before that, 93, thank you. I have my dates wrong. But, so he saw us doing interviews and talking to people on the street, and was so moved, he showed us his battle wounds. Like, he had been wounded really badly, had huge scars up his leg. He almost died, and luckily they kind of shielded him in a hospital, lied to officials who were coming through trying to collect people who were part of this coup. And he wouldn't leave our side. Like, he was like, I'm here to help you, to make sure that you're safe. Then he gave me the shirt off of his back, which was a Maduro and Simon Bolivar shirt. So we gave him a shirt, of course, and yeah. So that, I mean, that's just kind of the reception that we got. It was very warm and very moving. Yeah, signing of anti-US government stuff. They were like, sign my sign, sign it. It was super funny. And, you know, just, yeah, very warm. I think that's all the pictures that I have. That's like just a very brief version of events, and so I'd love to answer more questions.
I'm gonna leave that by you, we'll be answering questions. But before we do questions, we wanted to invite you each to dig into your wallets, to throw a few bucks in these two hats. We're gonna pass them around. The anti-war committee does amazing work, and you can help pay for their office space, their flyers, or whatever else they have planned next. Yeah, we have planned next. Say we. So with that, you want that one? Oh yeah.
Why is Simone Bolivar so black and shirtless?
Don't know. Don't know. It is a rather flattering picture, isn't it? Really flattering. Well, I'll tell one other funny Simone Bolivar story that was relayed to me. So obviously he lived he lived in the 1800s, and so the pictures of him are very, like busts of him look very different than some pictures of him. And after Chavez took power, they decided that they would exhume his body to figure out what he actually looked like. You know, that like high-tech scanning stuff. And so they released official photos of him, and people were crying. I mean, it was like a really big deal in the country to see what like he actually looked like, which is, you know. Does anybody care what Washington actually looked like? I mean, the dollar bill, they get facelifts, you know? Like, they aren't even real, the photos that they put on our money of these dudes. So it's so different.
Before we do questions,
So,
I'm gonna remind y'all.
before we get into the Q&A, we'll do a brief ground rules again, just a reminder. So again, no interruptions. We will call on folks and keep an eye on time. Limited to 2 minutes to get your question out. Again, no cameras. As we have our official camera to record the event, there doesn't seem to be any signs, so I'm pretty sure that one we're okay on that front. And yeah, that's about it. So we can begin. Erica.
So, I actually had a question because I went with, where'd she go? Remember? Anyway, there you are. I went with this lovely comrade back in like 2004 when like all the media in the US was calling Chavez a dictator. And then I realized it's like 15 years ago. Like, give the fuck up already, you know? Whatever. So my question is, like, when we went there, one of the big things was like, oh, he's got total control of the media. No one in Venezuela knows what's going on. And then we go there, and they only own one public station, and all the rest of it is owned by the opposition. And I'm like super hoping that that's like flipped the other way around. But I just want an idea on like what is the media like there.
So, Telesur has been very good, right? And that's a news station, but they still only have one station on the TV, you know what I mean? Like Telesur does the news, but otherwise it's still the same. Fortunately, that hasn't changed. Because they aren't expropriating the wealth of, you know, the wealthy's stuff. And that is a problem. Actually, yeah, maybe we'll come back to it later, but yeah, the news is still the same. And so that's hard because they propagate, I mean, it's like if you turn on the radio, I mean, it's kind of like now, you turn on the radio station and they all say the same thing about Maduro. You know what I mean? It's really hard to get real news. Thanks to John for coming. Yeah. You know, but they have a lot of this, that problem is still very similar.
Don?
So, one of the things that was repeated often about the electricity being cut off was that Venezuela is not, it's analog, it's not digital. So how could they be attacked from, you know, assuming some cyber attack? But from what I'm seeing, what you were saying is that it looked like they were physically, people were going to attack them and then to try and destroy whatever they could. Could you speak a little bit about it, because it was repeated so often?
So that is part of the problem. They haven't been able to upgrade fully their electrical grid. So some of it, a large part of it was actual physical attacks, like EMP type things that would like physically attack the grid. Opposition on the ground physically going in and actually breaking stuff. And so that is a problem. They don't have very much of it kind of upgraded, and so that's one of the things that they are working on, is trying to modernize it, partially because it needs to be modernized anyway, but also because they want to be more secure in that way.
Joe?
Well, I wanted to add a little bit more about the connections between Cuba and Venezuela, which the U.S. government has been blaming Cuba for the failure of their coup attempts. Pompeo even said that it was Cuban imperialism, it was 20,000 Cuban troops, which if there were Cuban troops there, you would have heard about it from day one, loudly and and constantly. There is close ties between Cuba and Venezuela for the last 20 years. Venezuela has been providing oil to Cuba, which is very important for Cuba because the electric power plants run on oil. And as Tracy mentioned, Cuban doctors and nurses have gone to Venezuela, along with some teachers as well. Well, I wanted to say something about the significance of the dates of some of these, that the U.S. chooses to do some of these things. The date that John Bolton announced increased sanctions against Cuba of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act and future sanctions on travel was April 17th. It was yet a commemoration of the Bay of Pigs. He was saying in his speech that the Monroe Doctrine was alive and well, but that was not the Bay of Pigs was not a great day for the Monroe Doctrine. And then 13 days later, the coup attempt 2.0 in Caracas was on April 30th. Well, some of us will remember April 30th as the last day of the Vietnam War, where the United States feverishly abandoning Saigon with the North Vietnamese army approaching the city. So that was also not a very auspicious day for the U.S. empire. Well, and I do have a softball question about, if you could talk about the Venezuelan embassy here a little bit, if you want to.
Here. I mean, yeah, I mean, we should give a big round of applause to the people who tried to hold it down. The fact is, so Venezuelan embassy people left, and then they invited Americans to try and keep it because it is theirs. You know, it's by law, by international law, it's the property of the Venezuelan government, and the U.S. has been going after it. They've evicted people on Thursday, evicted the final 4 people out of there, which is an act of war. And so, you know, the Venezuelans that I've been talking to, they're like, "What's going on with it? What are you doing?" But it's so far, you know, there aren't enough people around here that realize how big of a deal it is that the U.S. is going after their embassy, because that is a declaration of war by all international law, and so it's a crime that they have evicted people out and are handing the embassy over to the opposition. I don't know exactly what state it's in right now. That's what I'm trying to figure out because they desperately want to know. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think we want to, you know, people should be talking a lot more about because it's a big deal.
Layla?
Could you give us like a comparison? Could you give us a comparison between like the progressive movements in Venezuela versus the ones in like, the U.S.?
Oh, what a great question. All right, so one
What's
of
the question again? I'm sorry.
Comparison of kind of progressive movements in Venezuela versus the progressive movements in the United States. So one of the PSUV members, which is the PSUV is the largest socialist group. It's the group that Maduro is part of. So they have 7 million members in a country of 30 million people, right? And like the swag that they have is incredible. And this is like big groups, small groups, they all have the best swag because they just have a much larger base. Like you know, when you've been a slave country and when you fought for your liberation now twice, people are really keen to take up the mantle of making an equal state, which was exciting to see, but impressive too. I mean, like just the numbers were incredible. Like 400,000 people were out on May 1st. That's a lot of people. And that is notably bigger than it has been, but that's an incredible amount of people. And like, like that day, people do bus in from all over, but they especially thought it was important after a coup attempt.
CJ.
There is a lot of talk about Venezuela as an oil exporter. I know the PDVSA, PDVSA, I know that when it was nationalized, it was kind of fake nationalized in the 70s, then it was like for real nationalized under Chavez. And at the start, a lot of that money was used to fund those public housing projects. And I know it's been the site of a lot of, like the opposition has tried to stage like labor lockouts to stop the country's oil production. What's going on around the politics of it now, of PDVSA specifically, and like kind of the oil export, and how do Venezuelans themselves feel about PDVSA and what it does for them?
So I think that there's a lot of questions about trying to move away from oil being like their main export because it's so unstable. Like as an export, the price of oil goes up and down. The other problem that they have is the particular type of crude that Venezuela sells has additives that have to be put into it to make actual gas, and those additives are made in the United States. So one of the things that I got sent yesterday from my friend in Venezuela was that those additives are gone right now. The opposition, in addition to all the terrible things, they attack where those additives are stored, so they're out of gas. So natural gas is in short supply also, and so people need it, they do, but I think that they want to expand their economy. But, we went to the PDVSA site, not for very long, but it's the, huge murals. We went and a couple of our people did a radio interview, so they have like kind of leftist radio happening at the PDVSA, at the oil refinery. Like, I think it wasn't it's not the refinery, but it's like their offices, Does that answer your question? Kind of? Yeah. I don't think I got into the pictures because I didn't have a lot of context to talk about it, but people talk a lot about trying to move away from oil also because of the environmental impact. And so making the country more sustainable means that they have to expand what they're exporting, but also think environmentally about what the role oil is playing.
Hi, my name is Joe. I was just going to ask you, you talked about how they had a lot of large-scale housing, and then you used a figure that was very big, and that was kind of impressive. Could you repeat that?
It's 2.6 million houses.
Oh, housing?
Yeah, 2.6 million houses
Recently.
were created.
Yeah.
This is over 11 years.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so, and they range. The ones that I had in the pictures are really newer ones.
Yeah.
But there are older ones in Caracas, and they're all over the country. In particular, in Caracas, it's high rises because it's a major city.
What was the figure again? 2.6 million?
2.6 million.
Wow.
Yeah, super impressive. And if your starting point is housing is a right, it opens up a lot of possibilities that we won't see here.
Rick J.
You had your hand up earlier. Now you're pitching. All right. We'll come back to you, Rick. Come up with something.
Liam.
I was just wondering about what you got what feeling you got in terms of what the Venezuelan people think about the future and where they want to see their country in maybe 5-10 years, and where they're trying to take their country.
I think a lot of them would say they need to increase their food and productive forces, right? Like they need to be more self-sufficient because, they're still very vulnerable to the rich Venezuelans closing their doors, like closing up factories so that they can make food scarce. Polar is, lots of people see Polar products in here. They're made in Venezuela. That guy's real rich and real happy to go and close his doors so that he can make fake scarcity. And so they want to take more of there's lots of factories and places that have been abandoned. And so they're working hard to take those places over, land that's been abandoned, take that over so that they can make it productive for internal stuff, for their own needs. And so that's, I think, one of the big things they're working on, to continue these grand missions that would help build vital power, and then the communes, really building up these local communities and local power so that they can do transportation to, like all the things that they need. The ones that were mentioned in particular were food and transportation that these different communes are working on.
Kathleen.
I was wondering, Phil Reeves on National Public Radio, and I've heard other people on National Public, or Minnesota Public Radio even say, Maduro only has 20% support. I'm sure that's a lie. I'm sure that's propaganda.
Yeah, that's not even close to what I saw. There are 400,000 people in the streets on May 1st and like complete silence to hear what he has to say. People want to know what the response is to another U.S. attack. It does feel like that this last one was kind of a tipping point, because if what the Venezuelan news is, if what they said is right, they duped the U.S., which is pretty embarrassing. And I'm sure something we won't hear about in the U.S. And they don't have a route in. The border with Colombia is got a lot of people patrolling it, a lot of, especially like militant people, like Venezuelans ready to defend it. In Brazil, the country would go into chaos if they tried to invade, right? Like the Venezuelan people are on the border there, but also, Brazilian people don't want to see Venezuela invaded, I think, either. Yeah, so I mean, I find it hard to believe, like, I don't know where they even get that figure, because he won the last election by 67%. So, yeah, 20%, that's...
Isaac?
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the role that the Venezuelan government and Venezuelan people played in supporting the anti-apartheid cause in the occupied Palestinian territories.
That's a good question. Yeah, I wasn't in charge of the camera, so I didn't get to take pictures of some of the incredible artwork that was around. Around Caracas, there is artwork everywhere, and some of that was Palestinian artwork. And I don't think I included it, but there were Palestinian flags in all of the protests. So I don't know if they play I couldn't speak if they have an active role in supporting Palestinian causes or supporting, groups in Palestine, but I do know that the people of Venezuela feel a connection and feel strongly for the Palestinian cause.
Do you know if I heard reports that Hezbollah operates in Venezuela? Do you know?
They didn't introduce themselves to me. The flag that I saw was the DFLP, which is a smaller party in Palestine. And I don't know even how active they are. I mean, I went to Palestine in 2004, and I don't talk to people there very much right now. So, yeah, I couldn't speak to that at all.
I was wondering if they talked to you at all about covert operations that were happening, U.S. operations regarding the training of students or opposition candidates, what's going on with that, how they've been able to, lessen their impact, as well as if they talked anything about what they forecast as paramilitary operations, because obviously these attacks are paramilitary operations, and that there's a big border between Colombia and we've heard news about Eric Black, I think it is, proposing his idea of bringing a private army into Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera. So if you had any discussions around that, and it's kind of like Congress appropriates the money, but then it falls into a black hole, and there's really not a lot of, that's very hard to find reporting on that, except for maybe Max Blumenthal. Yeah. Anyways, if you could.
You mean Eric Prince?
Thank you.
Eric Prince, yeah, the guy who operates Blackwater. Or maybe it's formerly Blackwater, but...
Eric the Evil.
Yeah. They did
Prince.
talk a lot about what role they think the paramilitaries or, U.S. military is playing directly. They did, basically people impressed that, the military is a popular part of the culture and people, if you're not actively part of the military, if you're, you know, if you have the ability, most people have joined the militia. Like the militia is very, very strong. And so I don't even have numbers to back up what I'm saying, but I know that they would be large, that there are a lot of militia people around the country. And so I think it's they could bring in a private military force, but they would not do well. The other thing that we saw a lot of was just like people who had been to Colombia and had fought with FARC and who had fought in Nicaragua, had been part of, you know, like there's a lot of movement in Latin America. Like people get around, you know, especially like people who want to be active in fighting, and so they're no strangers to actual like warfare, and so people were very clear that they were ready to fight if it had to happen. And part of the reason that they're doing the things that they're doing, like not taking over the media and not taking, you know, expropriating wealth from these idiots who are trying to destroy the state, is they want to do it peacefully. And so a lot of them get to keep their wealth and their guns and all this stuff, but because they're trying to make it as peaceful as possible. But they were also very clear that they will defend it and have defended it with their lives.
I think you in the back had a question.
Oh, yeah. How is the countryside, I mean, you're talking about the co-ops, but I don't think those are like communes. How is the countryside organized? Because that's where, I mean, you can have farmland in the cities, but most of it's in the countryside, I assume. And I don't know what they produce in terms of who owns the land, or the big landowning, you know, stuff where, or not. I mean, it's been a big deal in a lot of countries, is that, because the city has a lot of people, but most, at least, I don't know about Venezuela, but most of the people live in the countryside.
Yeah, that's the idea of the communes, right? Is that these communities would take power, and they haven't been taking away land of you know, wealthy people who are using it. But if they aren't being productive with the land that they have, they take it. And that's what has been happening in the countryside and in the more rural parts. If there are factories that aren't being used, they have full rights to be able to take control of the factory and get it working again and actually producing for the country and for the commune. And so that's been happening all around, and is one of the reasons the Ministry of Communes, like that's an official ministry post that is in like really high regard, is really important, because that process is a big part of it. The amount of land that's in a few hands is incredible, and that's true around all of Latin America. I mean, that's like the history of Latin America, is like land you know, a few people having a lot of land, and so they are starting with just taking land that's not being productive. And so part of the peaceful process of it is that, yeah, if you're not using it, then it's ours, but if you are producing stuff on it, then you can.
The best land probably is in the hands of the big landowners. But the other thing, where does Guaido come from? I mean, he's some politician that the United States said, "You're our man." What's his legitimacy? He must have some claim to legitimacy for his supporters. I don't know. Being the United States too.
Yeah, I mean, he was the head of the. I'm gonna get the names wrong. So they had a Congress basically, and he was the head of it. But the Congress, over the course of several years, was found in contempt, right? They were doing things that didn't fall in line with the government. They were not following the laws of the government, and so.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, anyway, he was elected, and I'm not sure which part of the country he was elected out of, but a small part of the country, the opposition elected him, but he was not following the laws of the land, and they were booted. Like that whole part of the government, the Supreme Court said you're in contempt over the course of several years. Like they had several points where it could have been fixed, and so now they have the Constituent National Assembly, I believe, and Constituent, yeah, the Constituent Assembly, which is basically tasked with building a new constitution.
Which the opposition also boycotted joining.
Yes. Yeah, they were all, like, there are all these points where they could be part of it, and they don't. They only do the things that they know they can be in charge of, basically, is how it's going, which is disturbing.
Okay, Shireen?
So I have two questions. One thing that really strikes me every time I see photos of the opposition is how light-skinned they are. And I know that one of the first things that happened after Chavez came to power in the Constitutional Assembly was that indigenous people had their human rights recognized for the first time. And so I'm wondering if you had the chance to speak with indigenous organizations or Afro-Venezuelan groups and what they had to say in terms of conditions, how they've changed. And I'm wondering about the labor movement.
Yeah. So we didn't get to meet with people from those movements, unfortunately. That, you know, one of the things that they did talk about is that kind of just that fact, right? Like, suddenly now they have rights and are recognized within the country, and Maduro identifies as somebody with indigenous heritage. And so, you know, he's, I think, a hero to many, thinking like he actually represents us. They talked a little bit about, there's a place called Malambe that's a former slave colony that's like makes chocolate, right? And like they have chocolate bars from this area, and they specifically use that name to remember that they're a former slave colony that like took productive forces, and the chocolate bars they made under socialism. They're actually really tasty. Want to find it again, especially with it says that it's made with socialism. Pretty cool. And now I'm forgetting your second question.
Labor movement.
Oh, so the labor movement, just looking at the May 1st stuff is incredible. You know, like people are organized, and it's, I don't have any numbers. I don't think we were given specific numbers, but they really consider themselves as part of the process. And so they have specific labor representatives as part of the Constituent Assembly, and as part of government, they have specific representatives in a way that we don't see that here, you know? And they're people who are former workers, you know? So one of the things that Maduro's held up for is that he's a former bus driver. Like, he actually was a worker, which is so far from the world that we're in.
Meredith?
I wanted to first piggyback off your question someone gave before about Palestine. Is that when Eric and I were in Palestine in 2004. I was not with you. Not in Palestine. When Eric and I went to Venezuela in 2004, we went to a Palestine solidarity protest that was there. And that was really beautiful to see that connection that the Venezuelan people had with people of Palestine. My question was, and part of this has to do with the fact that when you listen to or read the mainstream news coverage, they always find like the anti-Maduro person to interview. And before they were always interviewing people, and they would be like, oh my God, it's totally happening tomorrow. We're totally gonna have the coup, and it's gonna be beautiful, and da 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 da. This week, I heard a radically different change in the type of interviews that National Public Radio has done, where they're just like, oh my God, it's maybe never happening. It's crap. And in part, some of the other things have been like people who left the army, who are like living on the Colombian border. Now Maduro and his cronies aren't paying for their housing anymore. Like, he told all these people to leave, and now like they don't have anywhere to live, and they're like complaining to the mainstream news media from our country about how he's not a real leader, which I'm like, nope. But anyway, I wanted to get a sense from you, like, you know, what's the spirit or like the sentiment? Because we aren't hearing those voices here in the United States. Like, do people feel like in the end they're going to be victorious? Are they terrified? Like, what's their attitude about this current crisis? Because their voices aren't getting through.
Yeah, a lot of people there felt like that was kind of the last hurrah. And so the next step is either direct U.S. military intervention, which I think most of them feel like it would be very bloody. Like, for us, for the Venezuelans, it would be very bloody. And so I think that they're afraid of that, but the opposition is really doing a number on their production and things like that. So they are, like I had mentioned earlier, they've attacked all of the additive reserves that they have, so they can't produce gas for their internal use. Our host, Dostor, was telling me yesterday that people sit in line for 2 days to get gas, which is just wild to think in a place that that has like the largest known petroleum reserves. like that they would sit in line for 2 days. And, you know, the sanctions have really done a number in the ability to sell their oil. And so India was a place that they were selling to, and now India has been pressured by the United States to not take it. And so, you know, that's really hard, I think, for them, because they feel like basically they're going to keep trying to strangle them. And so, you know, it becomes a question of what other options do they have. And I think that that's really where they're at in the country and trying to sort that out, which is definitely not a conversation I could tell you anything about, because it's on my place. And they're working it out. They're working really hard to find other productive forces or productive things and to work on making the country self-sustainable.
When you say attack, do you mean they blew up the supplies or that they able to cut it up? I mean, that's
So
paramilitary action. That's sabotage.
I mean, they can light it on fire. I'm not, you know, I didn't get, like, he didn't tell me what they did. He said that they have destroyed it, you know. And one of the pictures, you know, they're armed. The opposition is armed. And they're very dangerous. We stopped, so the coup happened on Tuesday. On Saturday on our way out is when I got the pictures of the bridge that the coup happened on. And as we're taking the photos, you know, I got out of the car, I was taking a few photos, and our guide was like, those idiots on the bridge have guns and they're taping the electrical grid. Like, they were pointed at the electrical grid that we had visited the day before. So we had to wrap that up right fast. I mean, they're openly out carrying guns, and so sabotage is a thing that they do.
In the back with the curly hair, I believe you had a question.
Well, a comment. I think that Guaido was known to about 20% of the population or less when he declared himself president. And, you know, he represents an extreme right wing that's never probably had as much as 20% popular support, and is probably less now. You know, their support is more in the, you know, wealthier areas, pretty concentrated, but not much else in the country.
Yeah, one of the stories that they told us, like one of the kind of major opposition areas during when all the electricity was out, totally lit up. They were having parties. They thought this was the time that they were going to thrive. They were all going to be totally successful. All the lights turned on. Everybody else is dark all around them. I mean, it's like they're willing to flaunt their wealth and use it and just be total assholes while people are starving and, you know, not able to turn on their stoves because they don't care. They will burn the country down to be in charge of the ashes.
And back to the black cap.
I had two questions that I want to reference. One of them was about the support for Maduro, and I did hear a low figure like that. At one point, somebody mentioned 20%.
Yeah.
He gets the 20% of the support of the country. I heard a figure like 30% about a couple months ago. I think around the time when I was wondering that you were going to go there. What about, so if that number is like skewed or anything like that, did you ever hear anything else about anybody else in the discussion of who was running for president? Do you ever hear about anybody that wasn't the opposition or Maduro? Do people talk about that? Are there smaller movements that are, maybe more, their objective is more to just respect the process as opposed to being anti-Maduro and anti-opposition? Did you talk to anybody in that area at all?
We talked to a bunch of different groupings in Venezuela, right? So they have a communist party and they have another party called MEP, which I don't know what that stands for, but they're more like social democrats. There are a lot of different groups. Because of the very organized and very dangerous opposition, they have come together to have the Grand Patriotic Poll. And so they don't run against Maduro, right? They agree that like Maduro is their candidate. And I don't see, I mean, the terms are for 6 years. He won last year in May. And so his term will be up in 6 years and we'll see if they come up with a different candidate, but nobody talks about another candidate. This is their president. But I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibilities, you know, like there's lots of great people. But Maduro is definitely the candidate of the people. Like you can see that in the people who will come out thinking they have to like physically defend their president, you know, on a moment's notice. And so, you know, hopefully they get to a point where there can be more people running, they can have more options. But I don't think people are mad about the fact that like people are banding together to defend their, you know, their president.
The current president.
Yeah, exactly.
What about Henry Falcone, the opposition candidate that did run against Maduro in the presidency?
I'm gonna come back to Falcone in a minute, and you said you had a second question?
Yeah, and it was something that you referenced before, when you were talking about just like, if we could just expand on what the people of Venezuela know about what we know and are like the people here or any other movements around the world, if they spoke about solidarity with any other countries and any other activist groups that had heard them out, if you knew anything about that, and then what if there's anything they expect from us or that they'd like from us.
Right. That's a really good question. So the people of Venezuela are really, they're much more politically aware than we are. So, you know, they would ask questions about like Black Lives Matter, you know, activism here and things like that. And they're very connected with the struggle happening in Colombia, partially because it's next door. And like, there's a lot of Colombians that are in Venezuela and a lot of Venezuelans that are in Colombia. Like, there's just a lot of border crossing, you know? And so people feel very, very tied into that struggle as well. And those are the ones that kind of stand out. And one of the pictures I had was actually a monument to the struggle in Colombia, which was really beautiful. When I asked Blanca, I called the Minister of Communes and like, people are gonna wanna know what you think we should do. And she gave this incredible, like, you guys need to change your society, like you need to create revolution in your country. Which is, right? Can't argue with that one, you know? And so we actually have it up on the Freedom Road YouTube account. We have like the taping of it, but that was like she just starts out, you guys need to change your society because right now it's dangerous to us, you know? And it can be done. Basically, they're like, we're showing you the way, time to get to it. Because they're just, you know, yeah, they feel, yeah, they sit pretty well.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you had a question about Henry Falcone. I saw, you know, in some of the opposition areas that, you know, I saw some of his graffiti up, but people didn't talk about him anymore. He's not like a big part of where people think things are going. Yeah.
I believe we had Rick.
Yeah, my question is, I'm interested in the history, and I'm looking for something I can read in English about the history of the struggle in the last 20 years, maybe 25 years. Because I know Hugo Chavez came to power only because there was an uprising.
Yeah.
And he refused to shoot protesters. There were like 2,000 protesters shot. And it was really when things started to change. So if you know a really good history, I'd be very interested in it.
If I find one, I will let you know.
Meredith.
Oh, Meredith's got her hand up. And she wants us to answer it.
Well, first of all, I totally recommend going to Mayday Books. They have a wonderful selection of leftist literature. But the second is that Dan Kovalik just had a book published.
Oh, that's right.
That's called "The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela: How the U.S. is Orchestrating a Coup for Oil." And I haven't had a chance to read it yet because it's coming out on June 25th. like, so it doesn't exist yet for me to get. But there are a lot of people in the Latin America Solidarity Movement who've read like excerpts of it and have been talking about it online that say that it's really good. And I know him from Colombia Solidarity work and have you know, liked his analysis around Colombia. So I don't know, that's something to think about. But you can't get it yet, but you can get it soon.
So we've got 2 more questions and we're gonna start to close up. So Mary?
Could you say something, address something about the role of and relationship of Russia and China to Venezuela?
Yeah, so those countries are both providing aid, and the Venezuelan government is happy to take aid. That's actual aid. And so one of the things that they said is, you know, they're also getting military advice, and they're getting like training and things like that, and supplies, like military supplies. So they feel like in some ways they're becoming the battleground for, you know, the U.S. is using Venezuela as a battleground to go after Russia and go after China. That's not 100%. I mean, obviously the U.S. has other aims as well in Venezuela, but I think that that's absolutely true, right? Like, similar in Syria, right? There's a big role that's being played by Russia in particular, and so the U.S. is trying to stave that off.
What they're trying to do in Iran as well.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Misty?
Yeah, I want to talk a little about, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the sanctions that the U.S. has used against Venezuela and, you know, a lot of the misinformation about, like, the reason that Venezuela's economy is in the state that it's in, or like this, Rick had mentioned, you know, like what about the last 20 years, and it's like some people want to act like, oh, why is Venezuela this way? Like, big shrug, like, what is the reason that this is happening? And like, you know, I mean, coming from like anti-war work, you know, when Iraq had sanctions on it for 10 years, it killed more people than the war did. And, you know, when you talk about when sanctions are used, how that creates a situation that creates inflation of their currency, and like, you know, things like, you know, infant mortality rates rise because they can't get medications and things like that. I think that a lot of the well-intentioned but misinformed U.S. citizens think, well, if we don't want a war, then let's just use sanctions to get them to do what we want. And I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about how, like, this situation, like that sanctions isn't like an option on the table, that these things are already in place and that we've been doing them for 20 years, and I just wanted to know if you could mention that.
Yeah, the sanctions started back when Chavez was the president, and have been ratcheted down. That's one of the reasons that they are having, you know, an economic crisis. Like, they have all this money, but they can't, like, all these oil reserves, but they can't get the additives to be able to sell their oil. They can't sell their oil because now the U.S. is going after every country that they would try to sell their oil to. And they're, you know, it's making it hard to get some good, you know, a lot of medical supplies and things like that are hard to find in the country. People were very clear that they don't, you know, they're worried that that information gets used against them, like you said, right? Like, where basically the narrative gets twisted, right? They act like it's Maduro's fault that they can't have all this stuff. I mean, we found flyers that were like, there's a humanitarian crisis. This is like the opposition flyers, or there's a humanitarian crisis and it's all Maduro's fault. Never mind that, you know, the U.S. has stopped, you know, allowing them, you know, basically stopped them from getting their money to be able to buy things in the global market or buy things from the United States. You know, like it's a place where people are used to having access to every good that we have, and then suddenly they're cut off. And so, Venezuela is interesting because it's a lot like the U.S. Like, it has a, you know, like the standard of living is really high, and then as they've tried to make their society more equal, there's also been sanctions cutting them off from a lot of goods. And so, it's really complicated and difficult. And people who are in the right, they know why these things are the way they are. You know, they can't get cooking oil now and things like that because of the basically not allowing them to buy the additives to be able to have cooking gas and things like that. But but the right wing is brutally using that against the Maduro government.
Sanctions are an act of war.
They are an act of war. Yeah.
Tracy, do you have anything you want to say to close up?
No, yes. So, thank you. So one of the things that's most important is that we do something with this information, right? Like Venezuelans were really clear that like they were happy to see us, but they want us to do something. They want us to be talking about it. They want us to be combating these lies. And the lies are so thorough. Like I have a dumb job, like it's unrelated to political stuff, and I was just telling people about my trip, and they started spouting the lies and said, well, I watched John Oliver, who normally, on domestic issues is really quite good. And the fact that John Oliver was wrong just blew this dude's mind, blew his mind. So if people can have these conversations, we can start cracking, like making a dent against this like terrible media blockade of what's actually happening in Venezuela. So I want people to use this information and to join the anti-war committee as we continue to do actions in support of the Venezuelan people. And Erica maybe has an action.
Well, no, not that. But I was just wondering, Tracy, since you provide such an excellent first-hand, account, would you be available if other organizations would reach out to you and mobilize their bases to come to an event? You would be their guest speaker. Maybe that's an action.
I love talking.
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically speaking, I am available from the committee to be rented out. Not Oh, I don't know about you jokers. After you get driver's licenses for all. Well, no, that's good. We're gonna fight for it.
Do you think solidarity groups should be picketing major news organizations like the Strib or CCO or
NPR, right? Oh,
Yeah.
no. Now the newest lie, this one I just heard yesterday, was that Maduro and Chavez created a criminal enterprise around the world. You mean the other 6 lies that you created weren't convincing, so we're going to try that one? Like, what kind of baloney is that?
Where was
Anyway.
that? Just fabricated an election.
They make up more
happen in January.
Yeah, they're just like, it's just like crazy. I don't, like, generally I'd say no, but part of me feels like anything that'll get attention, right? Anything that will try and crack through the fact that, like, they're all lockstep with the government.
Why is
US
the solidarity community so silent on those kinds of things, so inactive?
I wish I knew the answer to that one. Maybe we can fix it. But, that's something that the committee is talking about, like, and me and Sarah is another person who has been there recently, trying to write more op-eds and trying to find ways to crack into this media. And now Dawn is going to put me on the radio, so. Yeah.
I would love to see a big banner, hands off, U.S. hands off Venezuela, hanging from our secretary here. If anyone's inspired to make a large banner.
We have this excellent banner maker that may or may not be willing to work on that.
I accidentally bought a double cloth for my pre-Palestine banner, so I do have a cloth today.
That's probably something that can happen.
So I know this isn't enough, but I would like everyone to invite every Wednesday night to the Lake Street Marshall Avenue Bridge, that we have these signs that we're out there with Hands Off Venezuela. So if you're ever available on Wednesday night from 5 to 6, we're out there with the signs.
So.
Thank you. So we're the anti-war committee who put on this event. And in case you wanted to join or get involved, we do have meetings on Wednesdays at 7. And for upcoming events, we've got we're going to be at Pride, the Pride Parade, and we could use all the help that you will offer to distribute the new magazine that we created.
Hey, where do we meet?
Our new zine. Oh, we're right next door. We meet right next door, Wednesdays at 7.
Wait, one more thing. Just because we talked about driver's license, I'm just gonna say it. Okay, so Monday is the last day of the legislative session, unless they go into special session or whatever. Anyway, the fight for driver's licenses, has been ongoing for like 12 years or some really long time. But on Monday there is some talk about an action being kind of put into the works. So people should stay in touch with MIRAC or the Anti-Work Committee. I'm sure we'll share it too because they're pretty awesome. You can join them on Wednesdays or MIRAC on Thursdays. Anyway, that's beside the point. But anyway, please pay attention because if we need people out on Monday, we need as many people possible, and we would really appreciate anyone that could get out there. So, thank you.
All right, let's do a round of applause.